Hello, and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers. I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. What this is just an open conversation. It's me being available online for an hour a week, same hour every week, except there's going to be some changes in the next couple of weeks we'll talk about. Um, Imagining who might be watching this live, imagining who might be watching this after the fact, and what might be helpful to you, and saying as much of it as I can uh, based on my guesses. If you're here and you're in chat, I don't have to guess as much. You can tell me what you're interested in and what might be helpful, and that's great, and I love it, and it's more fun than doing it on my own. So for those of you who do that or are going to do that, thank you. Yeah, I always pick a topic. Today I have one in mind that was suggested we'll talk about, but we're based around what the people here want to talk about. So if you are in the chat and our conversation goes in a different direction, or even if I just get off on tangents, which I always will, that's okay. We don't have to stay within the bounds of whatever topic we're starting on. It's just a place to start the conversation. I run a practice called Effective Artistry. It's a therapy and executive functioning coaching practice. We do individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy. We're getting ready to start a couple therapeutic groups, in particular a parenting group related to issues about parenting and neurodiversity, particularly for parents of neurodivergent children, but we'll go more into neurodivergence and neurodiversity involved in being parents and having neurodivergent children, and etc. We do individual executive functioning coaching. We're getting ready to start some group stuff there too. I'm just kind of trying to rattle it all off. So logistics first before we get into what we're going to talk about today. So I am going to be traveling for the next 3 weeks, not in sum total, but on the days that are relevant for streaming. So next week I'll be from a remote location and we'll be at the lake with my family, which will be nice. The week after that, we are flying on the Wednesday during the time that the stream would happen. And the following week after that, we're flying back on that same Wednesday at the time that this would normally happen. So for those weeks, so next week it will be Wednesday at 1 p.m. The following week, we're going to do it on Tuesday, right before I head out. And the week after that, we're going to do it on Thursday, right after I get back. So those 2 weeks will be unusual, and we'll remind you here next week about that. I want to say same time, but I actually haven't looked at my calendar to see if the 1 to 2 slot is open on that Tuesday and that Thursday. So I'll keep you updated. Yeah, I think that's all the logistics stuff that needs to be put out there. So today we're going to talk about a concept that is very, very important to all of this. We talk about it a decent amount, but I very rarely actually use the terminology. I'm realizing that as I'm thinking back over how we've discussed this. Prioritization. We're going to talk a lot about prioritization today. Particularly, so one of our coaches, Sarah Geis, who's wonderful, hosts and produces the ADHD Artist podcast, which is a great one. I was on it a while back. It's fun having. She's a great interviewer and conversationalist. It's a good podcast, especially if you're an artist, neurodivergent artist of any kind, but particularly with an ADHD diagnosis. So she put a couple questions out there, which I really appreciate because they encapsulated some things that I've been dealing with recently. And a lot of it revolves around prioritization. So the first question that was put out there is, let's say you've got a bunch of different irons in the fire, right? You're developing leads or reaching out or floating ideas or whatever. And then simultaneously, a bunch of those start expanding and exploding, at the same time, you're hearing back from a lot of different people that are moving on to the next steps of projects. And it's great. And you're excited because you're excited about each of those projects. You wouldn't have pursued them at all in the first place if you weren't. But there's so many all at once out of nowhere. What do you do? And this is like a specific way of talking about this. But at its root, this is, I would say, the majority of people's initial concern when they're looking for executive functioning coaching, and honestly a lot of the people who are looking for therapy as well, is more or less boils down to, I have more on my plate than I can manage to do. How do I change things so that I can manage to do everything that's on my plate? Which, of course, is a good question to ask. And it's sometimes possible to change things and modify things so that all this stuff that you weren't able to keep up on becomes stuff that you are able to keep up on. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're just trying to do more than a person is able to do with the amount of resources that you have available. And that's where prioritization comes in. So we'll start with talking about prioritization in terms of attention, because we talk about attention a lot. And I feel like that's a good place to like hook this concept initially. And then we'll go from there into the other resources, right? So I'll give you the visual that I like to think of. My beard is bothering me again today. So of course I call attention to it. I like to think of it. I've used this visual metaphor with people before, but the phrase I'm about to use doesn't mean what I am envisioning. I just don't know what so help me out. I like to think of it as like one of those boards. Think of it almost like at a train station. Maybe that's a better way. I've been saying like a stock ticker. How to tackle tasks that seem very overwhelming. Yes, absolutely. Because that is a big part of this. What we define as a task is a part that I wasn't going to talk about, but that I will incorporate because it is very much the same stuff. Not that there's nothing outside of this, but the things that we're talking about are relevant to that. And we can go in different directions too. So think of it like a board, right? With a bunch of stuff listed on it in order. But that board is constantly shifting. Nothing stays in the same place for very long. What was number one goes down to number two, and something else is the new number one. Something gets taken off the board completely. Something new gets added. Just constantly shifting, right? So it's not about identifying patterns over time of what seems to be priority. That's useful, but a different thing than what we're talking about. And then you go down that list and you do it all. You notice it all, everything, until you run out of resources. In other words, there is nothing that my brain wouldn't want to be aware of, right? Like theoretically, picking up all the data about my environment and every concept and every memory and every idea that I've ever been exposed to that might be relevant to, it would be wonderful to have access to all that. If I don't need it, oh well, who cares? Except that we have a limited capacity to do it, a finite capacity. So we do have to care, not even consciously, our brains have to assign value to things and say, sure, I'd want to know it all, but I'm going to rank it in this order, and we'll just start at the top and be aware of as much of it as we can until we run out, and whatever's past that we don't notice. We've talked about this concept before on the stream, primarily as a way to change our thinking from, oh, I do the things that I want to do, and the things that I don't do, I didn't want to do. That's not true. You want to do, everybody wants to do way, way more than they're actually able to do. It's not about a lack of desire, it's about a lack of resources. And we see the lack of desire because it's relative, because I don't care as much about learning to play piano as I do about being with my kids. I have an awareness that there is some prioritization there. That theoretically, if something that isn't getting done moved high enough, then I would spend the resources on it. And that's true. But then you have to also say, okay, well, what are the things that are up there that are getting bumped down in the rankings for this to get more important, right? So that's mostly where we focus, is just switching it to, it's not that you don't care about those things, it's that you can't do everything. Because that framework matters. Just as a general thing here, if you are feeling distress, which I am talking about any negative emotional affective experience, if you're feeling sad, mad, depressed, tired, whatever, stressed, anxious, any emotional state that you don't enjoy, we're using the term distress to encompass all of that. Any emotional experience that you're like, I wish I wasn't feeling this way, I would like to not be feeling this way. If you are feeling distress about something, there are two ends to that. That distress is the gap between two things. One is what it is that you're observing happening. The other is what you think would be preferable that happen instead. So in order for you to feel bad about something that you're doing, you must believe that there is a better way to do it. Sometimes you have specific knowledge about what that better way might be. Sometimes it's just an idea that there must be a better way, or other people do it in a better way, therefore there must be a better way, or whatever. So before getting into all this other prioritization stuff, I think it's always good to start there, to look at, okay, what is the other end? So whether it's an overwhelming task or just an overwhelming number of projects all coming to fruition at the same time. In my case, we're getting ready for some travels, including the first time that we're doing air travel since the beginning of the pandemic in early 2020. So our first time traveling with 3 kids. Interesting. I have a comment from Twitch, so that might just be you. It's a lot. And we're having an effective artistry company barbecue in our backyard in a couple of days, and the timing there did not work out great right before. And I'm trying to work, and we're trying to raise 3 kids, and et cetera. It's a lot. It's overwhelming. So when something is overwhelming, I think that's the first place to start. It's, okay, what am I aiming to accomplish here? I'm feeling bad about the fact that I can't get all this stuff done. What exactly is all this stuff? Let me look at that in as much detail as possible. That can sometimes be helpful in and of itself. In fact, let's frame this around that specific question about an overwhelming task. Just know that even though we're saying an overwhelming task can be defined as this specific thing, or the task of doing all the stuff that's on my plate, or whatever, right? So sometimes just exploring and putting into detail, like breaking down the task, as people will often suggest, can be helpful in and of itself, because sometimes you're overwhelmed because you don't have clarity on what it is that you are supposed to be doing or are intending to do. It's just a vague, I don't like how I'm doing this or how I'm handling this, but I don't know what the preferable option would be. So it's literally as simple as just asking that question to yourself or to another person if you're trying to help them. If they're feeling overwhelmed, ask them what they're doing, what they're noticing, what they're feeling, and what they're doing. And then ask, and what is the other option? What is it that you wish you were noticing, feeling, and doing? Or thinking, feeling, and doing, whatever way it works for you. Because if you can't answer that second question, then we got to go a different direction with all this. If you can say, break it down, okay, it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this. I'm not worried about anything else besides what's on this list at this point. If you put down a list of stuff and you still like have a sense of, and I'm sure there's more that I just can't think of, then that goes into that same category of you're not quite clear on what all that stuff is, and we need to focus on getting clarity. But let's skip to assuming you have clarified every part of the task that is overwhelming you, including, remember, just the task of doing a bunch of tasks. Works the same way. Now you have something concrete to look at, to say, okay, not only do I know what is happening and the fact that I don't like what is happening, but I also know what I would like to be happening instead. Once you've got that set down, you can start to get more concrete about things, because then you've got to prioritize. And I have a couple different like exercises that I'll walk you through that are almost like worksheet style things that can help with prioritization. But you have to know that sometimes what you're trying to do is not something you can afford to do. Sometimes when a task seems overwhelming, it's not overwhelming because of how you're perceiving it or because of a lack of clarity. Sometimes you know exactly what you need to do and you're capable of doing it all, except not within the time frame or the constraints that you're trying to do it within. I can, run a D&D game and run a therapy session. I can't do them both at the same time, right? So whatever Sarah's mentioning, these projects, right? You're capable, obviously, of doing each one of those things, or you wouldn't be pursuing it in the first place, and you wouldn't be getting the responses from people who want you to do those things if they didn't agree. And this is my ridiculous example. Capability is not static. What you can do shifts context to context. We mostly don't talk about this because this is encapsulated in the concept of cost, and that cost varies. What we're really talking about is what can you afford to do. because you can do anything that a human can do given the right circumstances, because if nothing else, you could get whatever other human is capable of doing it to do it for you under the right circumstances. So we're talking about cost, but back to this, capability is not static. Are you capable of eating a burrito? Is that something that you can do? Yes. Are you capable of eating a burrito when you've just finished eating 7 other burritos in the last 45 minutes? Probably no. Probably not even capable of eating 7. I would not be, maybe in my younger years. And it's a ridiculous example, but I use those because I want you to have a very clear vision of, oh, this idea that I can just magically get everything done if I want to badly enough is not the case. You have limited time, you have limited energy, you have limited attention, you have limited awareness, limited money, limited social capital, all resources that you need to do things. You have limited amounts of those. So that brings us back to prioritization. Effectively, what we're aiming for and what people are usually asking about here is, I want to be able to make a plan so that I don't have to give up on any of those projects, right? I'm just going to make some stuff up here, but let's say I've put out feelers for 5 different projects, any one of which I would be happy to do and would take me a week's worth of work to do it. And then all 5 of those projects get back to me on the same day, which I didn't expect, and say, hey, this is great, we want it by next week. So of course, my initial reaction is going to be, okay, I got to figure out how to do all 5 of these things. And it is sometimes possible to do that. It's sometimes possible to switch how you're operating in a way that means that you can accomplish something that would take me a week, ideally, in much less time or with much less energy, to leave more room to try and squeeze something else in and something else in. There is not a way to do that without giving up quality, whether that's the quality of your experience or the quality of whatever product you're trying to generate for people. If you could do it that quickly, that easily, that cheaply, and get the same result, then that would have always been the way you were thinking about getting it done. You wouldn't be feeling overwhelmed. Of course, remember, we're wrong all the time, so maybe you can, but you don't think that you can't. Excuse me. So you have to ask that question first is, okay, what's the cost and what's the value? The value of fitting all 5 projects in is that I am doing all 5 projects. I'm fulfilling, creating 5 different relationships with people, whatever it is. The cost is that each of those things will be less. I will be less happy with those things than I would if I had the time I wanted and the energy I wanted. So to what extent, what cost sacrificing quality is worth what value, right? If 5 projects come back and one of them was your dream project and the other 4 are just pretty run of the mill for you, then maybe you do want to say to those other 4, hey, I'm really excited about this, but I am not available for a week because blah, blah, blah. Or maybe you don't even say because, and you focus in on doing that. Maybe if there are 5 that you think all are roughly equivalent, and you think it's more about doing it than about dedicating yourself to doing it in the way that you were hoping to be able to do it, then maybe you try and get them all in and cut back on things. Just remember, it's both ends. It's not that what I'm trying to do is a good and reasonable and appropriate and possible thing to do, and my struggle to do it is because I am deficient or doing it inappropriately in some way. And if I learn something or do something differently, I'll definitely be able to do it. We want to close that gap. And yes, we want to do everything we can to bring what I am able to do closer to what I'm aiming to do. But the reality is that sometimes we're going to have to deal with the fact that what we're aiming to do is what's going to have to give. We can get this closer, but this still has to collapse in on, I just can't. So this is where prioritization comes in. So let me walk through a couple different concrete and practical exercises that take place after the part we just talked about, where you've got to break it down to what are the component pieces to make sure that I have clarity on what I'm aiming to do. There's different ways to do this, and it depends on what other things you have done and what things you've found useful. So if you have done things like we've talked about in the past, energy management or time tracking, the kinds of stuff we talk about where it's you're observing your your default behaviors, default responses to things. How do I just operate when I'm not consciously trying to force myself to be different? If you found a lot of value in that, then you can skip straight to using that framework to look at this new list of stuff you're dealing with that's feeling overwhelming and make guesses about how each element of that list, how much of your resources it will take, which can make that the last part we were talking about, how much am I going to have to give up on, or what cost is worth what value, can make that a lot easier. That's part of the reason that I recommend those kinds of things. You gain that language, that ability to look inward and say, this is about how my energy works, this is about how my focus works, and etc. So that when you come up on something like this that stresses you out, you can break it down and say, okay, that's going to take me, not just in terms of time, a couple hours. It's going to take me a couple hours, and in that couple hours, I'm going to have to be able to spend 30 points of energy to get it done. Or this one's going to take me 4 hours, but not all at the same time. It's going to be 4-hour-ish chunks over the course of 17 days. And each of those is going to take me X amount of energy. And you can start jumping straight into a plan from there. Okay, here's my time and here's my energy that's needed. Here's what my energy and time usually looks like. And I can make a plan the same way that we've all made plans a bunch of times in our life, just adding the energy piece on top of the time. You make your guess will be wrong. You see what happens, you adjust the plan as you get more information. If you haven't done any of that, then here are some other ways to start from the jump. One is to do a single elimination tournament bracket. So pick up, most people know them, I think in the States, as March Madness brackets. You can get empty, fill outable ones online. And on that the first round, you just fill in all the things from your list, all the things that are on your mind that you need to get done or want to get done or that are feeling overwhelming. And then you run the tournament. So each one is a competition of one against one. Maybe it would be helpful if I drew this out a little bit. I'll use a Post-it. So we're talking about a bracket that looks like this. That looks like this, and then I just draw it where none of you can see it. That looks like this, right? And on that first round, I put, okay, pack for trip, get food for the barbecue, make plans for the trip, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I fill out all my things over there. And then I go through one by one, and the contest is between the two that are connected. So, okay, pack for the trip, get food for the barbecue. If I could only do one of those things, which would be the one that I need to do? I'm going to say pack. You're going to feel bad about whatever thing doesn't move on. But remember, this is an intellectual exercise. You're not saying that you're not going to get the food. You're saying, if I could only do one, which would it be? Don't let yourself have wiggle room here, because otherwise everything is going to be, well, it depends. And then we got nothing out of it. Which, by the way, if that's how it's going, just don't use this exercise. There are other ones I'll give you in a minute that might be a better fit. And then, okay, plans, one here against the whatever else. Man, this lighting is... So this game here, plans beat this filled in thing. And now it's a new competition between plans, make plans for the trip, and pack for the trip. If I could only do one, which would I do? And I'd put pack there, and so on. This is a really great way to isolate out which is the most important thing for you to do. It doesn't help with anything beyond which of these things is the most important, because the reason that the March Madness tournaments and whatever have seeding on the side is to say, okay, this one we think is a leader, so we're not going to put it against another leader in the first round, because we want that other leader to be able to make it further in. So in other words, you can't just say that the one that lost the championship in this is your second most important thing, because the second most important thing might have randomly come up against the most important thing earlier and lost. So this is just to get your number one. After that, you can repeat the exercise to get your number two, and repeat it to get number three, and so on, by removing the other ones. But that's very time intensive. So this is mostly something I recommend for people as a starting point. When you're feeling overwhelmed, it is often very, very helpful to just pick one thing and go on that one thing. And this is a great way to pick that one thing. use that specific question. So if we're talking about tasks that seem overwhelming, and I've broken it down in clarity, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. Actually, if you're still there and able to chat in the Twitch, give me some more prompt or question to make sure that I'm going in the direction that you're asking about, because maybe it's worth talking about how to break things down more. I want to make a mobile game. Something my wife has mentioned several times. She wants to play it. It'd basically be managing a little flower shop. That sounds delightful. And the task seems overwhelming. Okay, let's use this specific example. So I didn't mention earlier, when you're looking at your tasks, one really good way to divide those things up into different categories early is tasks I have set myself versus tasks other people have set me. And then under those categories to then say tasks that have a deadline and tasks that do not have a deadline. Deadline meaning, because obviously in the case where somebody else sets it for you, they will set the deadline for whatever reason, if there is one. In tasks that you set yourself, what we're asking about deadline wise is there a point in time where once that point passes, the value of what I'm trying to do diminishes significantly? Meaning, if I completed it by X time, it would be a lot more valuable, but then if I completed it at any point after X time. So is there, a grant that you want to apply for to make the mobile game, or a competition you want to submit it for, or a time later in the year when your family's getting together and you want to be able to show it to everybody or whatever? If so, deadlines and mark it down. If not, it goes into that other pile. Because this probably, I'm guessing here, but you can clarify, falls under, for sure, a task that you've set yourself and a task where there isn't a deadline, I think, I would guess. That stuff affects prioritization. So to break that down, we're backing up now. We're leaving the prioritization stuff for a little bit. Right now, what we're talking about is sequencing, or I like to call it operationalization. Sequencing is the executive functioning component. It just means the ability to hold connected things in some kind of order that is useful. So that can be holding it in chronological order, that can be general to specific, or giving somebody the information that they need in order to then get the next piece of where you're going for, or whatever. It just means a logical order, something that helps you to carry a bunch of separate steps kind of connected and tied together as one process. Operationalization is when you just take that and make it external, whether it's by saying it to somebody else or writing it down or recording yourself or whatever. It means I'm putting down step by step what things need to happen in order for me to get where I want to be. So depending on where you're at with all that, we're going to assume you have none of that, just to talk about it as an example. So then the first thing you start with, like we talked before, is what is happening and what would I like to be happening instead? What am I aiming for? In this case, what's happening? I don't have a mobile game. I talk about it and it's a fun idea, but it isn't created. What would I like to be happening instead? I would like there to be an actual mobile game that people can download on the App Store and pay money or whatever. Don't have the excess resources to hire someone else to help me, so it's all me. The problem is I've never released a full game before. It's only been a hobby, so there's a ton of stuff I need to learn to make it good enough to publish. Ooh, we'll come there. I do hope to make some profit off of it because we could use the money, and feeling more secure is always nice, especially in this kind of concerning economy. Yeah, all great, makes sense. The one line in there that's causing you problems is I've never done it before, so there's stuff I need to learn to make it good enough to publish. Not that that's causing you problems because it's a bad thing to want to make it good enough to publish, but because I'm guessing, and I could be wrong, but usually when people say something like that, they don't have more specific criteria underneath it. In other words, if I showed you two versions of this game that you are talking about wanting to make, one of which you consider to be publishable, and then the other one you do not consider to be publishable, how would I be able to tell which one is the publishable one? It has to be observable in that way. This is something that's true of all art, and what you're talking about is absolutely an artistic process. I am creating something with the intention of that thing being impactful for somebody else who's going to view it, consume it, interact with it later on. Meaning, I don't have access to the audience, the intended audience. I just have to imagine what the thing I'm creating might look like or feel like or be like, how it might impact those people. You will never, ever reach a point in that process where you are going to say, oh, yes, I am no longer concerned. I believe that this will impact every person who interacts with it in exactly the way that I'm hoping that it will. So, good enough. Define how much is good enough. What does that mean? And we can talk about all kinds of things that I do with people a lot to try and get them to lower the bar of what's good enough, especially for initial attempts, because that's often useful, but it's not always useful. So I'm not going to assume and go into that stuff. You might have a very reasonable and, a bar that you're comfortable aiming at. If you don't, then that's what you want to explore. And if that's what you want to explore, or I guess I should just say, if you're exploring and unpacking anything, do not try to do it yourself. It's practically impossible to do something like that yourself. Doesn't mean you need to hire a professional or add someone to your team. It just means you need to do it in communication with other people. Great. The thing you're most concerned about is the quality of the art. Look at that right there. That quickly you go from, and of course, I don't know what things you've been thinking about or not, but in your description of it goes from an overwhelming task to really, I guess I'm just worried about the art. So then when we go back to the prioritization stuff, and again, quality of the art, I want you to, as best you can, come up to it with an answer of, I'm showing you 2 pieces of art for the game, one of which you consider high quality enough, one of which you don't. How would I know which one is which without you telling me, right? And with this kind of stuff, the most effective and efficient way I know of to do that, generally doesn't always work, is to look at art that's out there, to be able to pull things and say, yeah, I like this, I don't like that, I want this feel, blah, blah, blah. I just got a text from my brother teasing me about an online game of Settlers of Catan that we're playing and totally disrupted me. Yeah, so now you've got art as a bucket, right? The quality of the art is one of the buckets. It's one of the, I shouldn't say buckets because I haven't said that part yet. It's one of the things on your list. One of the components underneath this overwhelming task is art. And you're already clear without having to go through any formal exercise that one is taking a lot of my resources. A lot of my concern is there. So we can explore that. And a lot of things can go under that. Even other things that might be on your list, you can say, oh, that's really about quality of the art. I'm putting it all together, right? They're very much in these creative processes, artistic processes, is an idea. Honestly, I think of it in game terms. Like in many games, especially role-playing games, which are usually my favorite, but in many different kinds of games, you unlock abilities as you level up or as you gain experience or get a new item or something like that, right? And so I think we have a tendency to think of things that way, that the ability to write or to compose a great piece of music is something that you unlock. You develop these skills, these specific subset of skills. I gotta silence this because they're blowing me up about Settlers of Catan. That I can break this down into this specific subset of skills, and if I master those skills, I will then be able to compose a great piece of music. But that's a shorthand. It's not that it's not, that as you develop your skills or that it's worth breaking it down into small skills to develop and whatever. It's just not that binary that once you can compose great pieces of art, now all your art is great. Like some of it's great, some of it is not. It's not about your ability to compose it. It's about the actual material reality of the thing. And especially in something subjective like a game where some people like certain kinds of things and other people like other kinds of things, it's what is great is really what is generally agreed upon to be great, right? You can think it's great, but if you release it and everybody hates it, then it wouldn't be considered great and you wouldn't consider it great anymore. That's a lot of what you're struggling with, right? Is I don't want to release it until most of the feedback I get about it is going to be good, until I feel like most of the feedback I get about it will be good feedback. So we're trying to make that guess. That guess is very difficult to make alone. You need alpha and beta, well, readers. Well, now it's coming through on my computer. I'll just mute my computer. I say readers because I talk with writers about this a lot. Alpha consumers, alpha audience, and beta audience. Alpha is, in this case, it sounds like your wife probably would be a good alpha audience. Alpha is somebody with whom you feel safe, that you can show them what you're working on or talk through what you're working on with them, give them a sense of what you're thinking about doing or are doing, and they'll give you feedback based on what they like or don't like or whatever, but it will not impact how they perceive you in terms of your value. That theoretically and hopefully you have some relationships in your life where you could say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing. And they could say, yeah, that sounds lame to me, but what do I know? Other people might like it. And neither of you has to think, oh no, does that person now think less of me because I threw out an idea that they didn't like? Or, oh no, is that, they might be thinking, oh no, is that person going to be upset with me because I said I didn't like the idea? That hopefully you have some relationships in your life where that is not the case, that you can just say, yeah, your thing's your thing, my thing's my thing, and we share it anyway. That's what you want for alpha. You just need other eyes on it or ears on it or whatever, somebody else to experience it without feeling like it's a terrible risk to take. So safe people, 1 to 5 if you can. Then there's beta. In the beta audience, what you're looking for is people whose feedback you care about. Meaning, not that you wouldn't care about anybody, let me clarify, care about there. Meaning, the beta audience are people who belong to the group, the population that the game is intended for. So if I am writing a fantasy novel and that's not my wife's thing, I still might ask her to be my alpha reader so that someone is reading my pages and I just have an idea in my head that this matters because other people are consuming it. And hey, look, she doesn't hate me now, so it's not as dangerous and scary to reveal as I might sometimes worry that it is. But she doesn't like fantasy novels. That's not her thing. I wouldn't be expecting her to give feedback of like plot arcs and characters and tropes and things like that. She might anyway, and I'll listen and take that in. But that's not the point. The point is that she's a safe person to share it with. In beta, the point is you are someone that likes the kind of thing that I am trying to make. So your feedback is more meaningful to me because if I have 20 of you and all 20 of you give me the same feedback, that's pretty good for me to know, okay, I think the population of people who might be interested in what I'm doing are roughly going to have this feedback for me. So let me see what I can change there. And then you offload the completion criteria to them. Instead of coming up with the answer to the question I said earlier about if I show you 2 pieces of art or 2 versions of this game, one of which you consider publishable or good enough, how would I know the difference? If you're struggling to answer that question, and it is a very difficult, even impossible sometimes question to answer, especially with stuff like this, then getting that alpha beta audience going and offloading it to them, where the question is for your alpha readers, do you think I could share this with my beta audience? And they say, yeah. Or they say, no, I think you should. Like that part could be a little embarrassing or whatever if you shared it. Yeah, I think you should kick this around a little bit more, whatever, right? Like alpha reader's job is to say, you're ready to share this with beta. And when they say that, you do. And then the beta reader's job is to say, yeah, this is good to go. This is ready to be shared with a wider audience. And when they say that, you do. They make the call, not you. Because there has to be some completion criteria. Some of these overwhelming tasks become overwhelming. That's why we started where we started, about defining what it is that you're trying to aim at. Because some of these things become overwhelming because there is no completion criteria. Meaning you can criticize what you're doing. You can criticize what you're seeing. Like if I can criticize myself for not writing enough, or I can write a bunch, but then criticize the writing as being not good enough. So I can criticize what is happening as being not what I would want. But if I don't know what I would want, then I have no point at which I can say this is done. If you combine that with something that a lot of people in our culture, pretty much everybody in our culture struggles with, the idea that quitting is bad, then that means I don't want to, logically and reasonably, I don't want to start anything. Because once I start, I can't quit it, because that would make me a failure and a quitter and a bad person. And it's another thing I'm giving up on, and I don't want to get into that same pattern again, blah, blah, blah. But I also don't know how I will know when it's done. So starting it is effectively, in that way, like cognitively for yourself, is committing to locking yourself into doing this thing for the rest of your life, because you don't know that it will ever be done. You'll just know when it's not. And you know that once you start, you can't quit. So get that completion criteria, make it observable and objective. And if you can't do that on your own, you have to have other people involved who do it with you or for you at your request, right? You don't want other people to just barge in and be like, yeah, this is ready to go. But when you say, I need your help, because I'm always, you're always going to look at your stuff and see the unfinished parts or the bad parts or the parts that aren't quite the way you wanted them to be. We as humans are terrible at modifying the depth of detail that we're looking at in something we've created when we're imagining how somebody else might perceive it. I honestly don't know how you could do that. I don't think it's possible to just imagine that I didn't know the depth of detail here. How would I know, right? I think I've mentioned in the past, last year I made a full EVA foam suit of clone trooper armor for my 6-year-old, then 5-year-old, for Halloween. And when it was done, all I could look at and be like, that part's sloppy, and I had to rush on that part to get it ready in time and whatever. And all anybody else ever said was, that's incredible, that's amazing. And now that time has passed, and it's been 8 months or however long, now I look back at those pictures, I've forgotten all the detail that I was worried about. Now I look at the picture, I'm like, oh yeah, that is incredible. How was I so self-conscious about, like, I don't even remember what things, I don't see anything there that I could have pointed at to say that's not great. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but so if what you're waiting for is for you to feel bolt from the blue, yes, this is ready to be published, that's not going to happen. Either you're getting due dates from other people, or you have objective, observable criteria to observe and say, well, it's going. Usually it's the deadlines from other people, honestly, or, it would be good to get it done by this time so I can share it with my family. Self-imposed, but still a deadline. This is part of the reason that starting early, which is a very common thing, people will say, if I only started earlier, doesn't really actually work the way that we all imagine that it would or should or hope that it could. Because a lot of this stuff, the reason that you're struggling and feeling overwhelmed and getting stuck on it and doing it at the last minute, a lot of it is because you have no completion criteria, no way to identify it as being done other than the deadline. So if you start a day before the deadline, you'll do a day's worth of work and turn it in. And if you start 2 weeks before the deadline, you'll do 2 weeks worth of work and turn it in. And theoretically, it will be higher quality, yes. But without specific criteria to aim at, how do you really know? How do you know that the earlier version wasn't better anyway? A lot of that is the process that's involved, I think, with most people when they're putting things off until the last minute, is some quick version, usually beneath awareness, I think, of, okay, what would be the benefit of starting this early? I guess there really isn't any, because I don't know what I'm aiming for, but it would be better to start earlier because it would be better. But how much do I care about how it, whether it's better, and how much better will it be for the extra 2 weeks of work? And it just gets abandoned, and I'll get it. You end up doing it at the last minute, which is your assessment of, at what point can I start this thing and still complete a version of it that I am okay with turning in by the deadline. And after that point, if I were to start, I am not going to be able to turn in a version of it that I'm okay with by the deadline. That's what last minute means, right? And a lot of the time we're accurate about that. We start last minute, we feel terrible about it, but we do get the paper done and we do get it turned in, and it's stressful and we don't like doing it that way, but it does get done and it does get in and it does get the grade that we need it to get. which again is a different thing. It's not that that's okay then if it's problematic or stressful or more costly than you want it to be. We still want to change it, but that's a different thing, and therefore we want to approach it differently than I'm starting too late and then the things aren't getting done. And I've seen a lot of people get locked into bad patterns where it's actually this, it's getting done and it's getting the results I'm looking for, but it feels like it could be better, should be better in some way. But they're thinking of it as this, I am not getting it done, because they think of the starting early as the task, and I didn't start early, so I'm failing and I'm bad. I'm telling you, the number of people I have had who are distraught, in tears over I'm such a terrible student, who are also straight A students at prestigious universities. I mean, this is many, many people I've worked with. So again, why we talked at the beginning about defining what you're going for. Anyway, back to prioritization, unless there's more like specific follow-ups on any of that or takes us elsewhere or whatever. Because we talked about how to like break things down. Oh, operationalization. So operationalization is taking a sequence and externalizing it. An ideal operation is one that a person with no contextual knowledge could execute and still get the desired outcome. You will not ever actually create an operation like that. That's not the point. It's not possible. It's a goal state where the closer you get to it, the more clarity there is, and therefore the better in terms of that thing being executed. But the closer you get to it, also, the more costly it is. So we're trying to make a decision about how much is it worth breaking it down and being specific and in ways that you don't need contextual awareness. So what I mean is, I could make an operation that says, step 2, make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Or I could say an operation that says, step 2, go to the pantry. Step 3, open the pantry. Step 4, locate the bread on the second shelf. Step 5, take the bread out, blah, 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 right? We don't want to over-explain and we don't want to under-explain. Minimal resources that are necessary in order to accomplish the task. So if you don't have clarity, you need to operationalize it further and imagine that ideal. I am writing something for someone who has no contextual awareness, no prior knowledge or experience. What would I want to clarify for them? Again, not to actually do that, but that's how you get more specificity when you're feeling unclear. And the way that you know if you've got more down than you need is you're bored and you feel like it's tedious. I don't need to write out all the steps to making a peanut butter and jelly. I know how to make a peanut butter and jelly. And then you watch what happens. If you keep getting stuck on step 2, make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I don't know why that's what we're talking about, then you come back because you've got the operation written out. Now you can assess at what point in this operation am I getting stuck over and over. Okay, I get stuck at 2 a lot. And if I make it past 2, it seems like I get stuck at 6 a lot. And if I make it past 6, it seems like I pretty much get it done. Well, now I know which 2 steps I really want to focus on. Do I really have a clear idea of how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or how to know that it's done and I'm ready to move on to the next step? That's a very brief, operationalization thing. Back to prioritization. So again, if you've tracked your resources, it's much easier in advance to say, I think I can get to this and not that. If you haven't been tracking your resources, then you don't want to worry about making an advanced decision about what you can get to and what not. You just want to prioritize and rank things and then go and get as much done as you can until you run out. And of course, sometimes that's problematic because you've got to in advance accept the project or decline or delay or whatever, which is why it's good to track these things so that you can do that, because there's not another way that I know. So single tournament bracket is a good way. Another one is without dividing it down into a series of 1v1 questions like that. You can sometimes, but the longer your list is, the less I would recommend. In fact, the more I would recommend not doing this. The shorter your list is, the more appropriate it can be. To just look at your list and ask yourself this question: if I could only do one of these things, which thing would it be? Because then you're doing a version of this where you start at the top, okay, there's that, and then you compare that against the next one and say, which of these 2? Okay, and I carry that one forward. So 1 or 2, 1. 1 or 3, 1. 1 or 4, 4. 4 or 5, 4 or 6, etc. Similar kind of a thing. Just sometimes you can do it in your head more easily, and sometimes you can't. So I like to write out the official way. Another way of doing this, so I mentioned the word buckets earlier. I like to use that word to talk about concepts or tasks or whatever. Because remember, I can make get through the week a task, or I can make get out of bed one task, brush teeth a second. The level of specificity, we can go wherever we want. So here's the thing: is literally get containers. So I'll use buckets, even though I doubt anybody's going to actually use buckets for this, but I'll use that word. But really all I mean is something that is distinct from other things, even though those other things are another example of the same thing. So if I have 5 different binders for my 5 different projects, that works. If I have 5 different bowls, 5 different buckets, 5 different notepads, 5 different Post-its, colors of Post-it, whatever. We just want containers, and I'm going to refer to those as buckets. So when you're doing this breakdown, you can break it down first into the buckets and then break each bucket down and literally have a physical space in front of you where you take Post-it notes or something to write a small, okay, I'm looking at this bucket, which is project 1. And for project 1, I'm going to have to do this. That's one note. This, that's another. This, that's another. And I throw them all in that bucket. And I do the same thing for all of them. And then I can get a visual of like, okay, that one's involving a lot more steps. If I want to visualize value as well, because that's about visualizing cost. And by the way, to like modify it even more if you can and are interested and want to, is, and instead of Post-it notes, you could take things like beans or rice or whatever and get little baggies with labels on it so that you can make a visual of like, okay, this subtask is a big one, so it's a big baggie. This one's a little one, so I have more. But again, takes more of your time, energy, money, blah, blah, blah. So only if it seems useful to do it to that extent. Anyway, if we're just doing it by task, I can get a sense of the complexity, the cognitive element of how many things, even if that one has 10 tasks and that one has 2, and those 10 are all very simple and won't take much, and those 2 are huge, the 10 is still more cognitively draining. It's more complexity, more steps and sequence that I have to track. This one is more about execution. So I'm starting to separate out into how much of it is about knowing what to do versus how much of it is about doing the thing that I know what to do. So I can start to separate it out that way to see the cost. I can start to do the same thing to assign value. Take a different color of Post-it note and start writing out the values of each of those things and putting them in each bucket. Some of those values, like make money, are going to go in all of them, or 3 of the 5 or whatever, and you just do it for each one. So now you can start to visualize the cost and the value in terms of the complexity, the cognition, not necessarily the execution. And then in terms of planning, if and when you start tracking your energy, which if you haven't done it before, you should start doing when you are trying to get better at prioritization, because otherwise you get stuck in this idea that if everything is high priority to me, then I will make it work. As opposed to, it does not matter how high priority everything is, I have limited resources. So start tracking it. And then you can start at first just observing and putting things into those buckets based on what you are doing, right? Oh, I spent a lot of time thinking about this one yesterday. I'm going to write down thinking and I'm going to put it there. I spent a lot of time doing that. I spent a lot of energy on this. Blah, blah. And start seeing where you're allocating your resources. And you can also then start to try and plan and intentionally allocate your resources preemptively to say, okay, tomorrow, what we're aiming to get at theoretically here is, I think tomorrow I'm going to have 10 Post-its worth of stuff in me. So in these buckets, I got to select which 10 Post-its I'm pulling out to do tomorrow. And give yourself a hard limit so that you know, okay, I'm going to start with all 10 from here. Now let me look at this one. Ooh, that's important. So which of the 10 do I have that I have to put back in order to make room for that one? Everything else you're taking on is something else you're giving up. You have to be aware of that. I know I'm hitting it very hard because I see this a lot where people notice a gap between what they're doing and what they think they should be doing and assume it's about they're doing it wrong and it's a deficit. And so the entire time, all the strategies they're looking at are aimed at getting better at doing all this stuff. But there's a limit to how much of that you can do. You cannot run 4 marathons in a day. I don't know. I'm assuming maybe somebody theoretically could. If that makes sense. So prioritization is inherently, if you don't go into prioritizing, knowing that what you're talking about is what things go undone, then you're not prioritizing and you will not be able to make a priority list. If you're going into it thinking, I'm going to get all of this done, I just have to figure out a way to make that happen, you might be doing something impossible or aiming at something impossible, just organizing it, which means you will never organize it that way. But if your explanation is, if only I could organize it well and plan it well, I could get it all done, I'm sure, you get stuck and you never got going on anything because you're trying to figure out a plan that will let you do everything. So just say, first this, then this, then this, then this, then this. And I go on this. And then when I get done with it, can I do this second thing? And when I get done with it, can I do this third thing? Even better, I like to call it a menu. You do that same thing, use whatever process you want to use in order to assign this is most important, this is second most important, third most whatever, including talking it through with other people and getting their help on it. If that seems helpful and if it's an option. But then you make it a menu. Instead of, I got to get number 1 done, and then I'll do number 2. And when I'm done with that, I'll do number 3. Instead, you have a menu. When it is time, when I have space and energy and time to do something from my menu, I'm going to pull out the menu and I'm going to start with number 1 because that's the one that I said was my highest priority. And I'm going to look at number 1 and say, do I want to do this? Feel like I can do this? Am up for this right now? If yes, I'm going on it. And I can go pull out the bucket I have, the binder I have, the files I have for that thing and get going on whatever the next step is. If no, okay, what about number 2? Do I feel like doing this one or feel up for this one or capable or whatever want to? If yes, do it. If no, keep going down the list. And my rule for people is when you get to the bottom of your list and your answer has been no for everything, you're going to end up doing something anyway. Whatever that thing is, you have to add to your list because it is an option, obviously, or you wouldn't take it. So if you go through your whole list and say, no, you know what, I'm just going to go watch some TV. Then you add watch TV to the bottom of the list because rather than feeling like you failed to do anything productive and now you're just doing TV, what's really happening is you don't have whatever the resources are that are necessary for you to do those other things. You want to do them. They wouldn't be there if you didn't want to do them. You want to do them. If you're not doing them, it's because you cannot, or it would be more costly than you can afford or more costly than other options or whatever. And whatever you end up doing serves a purpose for you. We can make a general guess at something like those kinds of things are restorative to your energy or something like that, but that's not always necessarily true. But it serves some purpose, and we don't need to know what the purpose is. We just need to know it's a thing that we do sometimes. And whatever purpose it serves is still useful and productive. So put it on your list. If you don't think it's as useful and productive as all the other projects you've got, then put it at the bottom. But if you get no, sooner or later you get to it. Everything you're doing when you have the spare time and energy to do it, like, I have some free time and energy. Where should I put that into? What of the things on here should I work on next? Everything that you end up doing should be on that list. You should never, ever feel like whatever you ended up doing was a failure because it wasn't on the list. You just grow your list, recognize the importance of what it is that you're doing. I kind of went all over the place. I got to wrap up, but I should encapsulate. We talked about a lot. Prioritization. Yeah, really, with a lot of what I'm trying to hit here is let go of the magical thinking that if I try hard enough, if I care enough, I'll be able to do it. Or the flip side of that is more commonly what people will think, which is I'm not doing it all, and that's because I don't care enough or don't want it enough or haven't figured it out. Sometimes there are things that just can't be figured out. So explore that in detail, because I don't want to say it is or it isn't. You just have to look at the specifics instead of saying it would be better to do this and worse to do that. Look at this is what this is, and this is what that is, and what are the costs and value of each one, because then you have at least more control, more of an ability to make decisions. If you can't get all of those things done, then you won't get them all done. The question only becomes, how much influence and control do you have? How much choice do you exert over which parts of those things get done versus not? If you prioritize in this like conscious and deliberate way, you can make more decisions about, okay, the things that are going to go undone are the ones that I'm most comfortable with leaving undone. If you don't do it that way, then you just will crap out, whether that's your brain or your body, whatever, but something's going to give and you're not going to get stuff done. And it might be the stuff that you most wish would have gotten done. And later on, you're like, damn it, why did I spend all that time and energy doing this thing that didn't really matter and then didn't get to this other thing that mattered a lot? That's all. And hopefully most of the time you can get done all of the things that you're putting on that list to get done. If you can't, yes, long term, you want to look at developing skills, making changes to the environment and the context and whatever to make it so that you're more capable of being efficient, doing more with less resource expenditure in those areas. You also want to get better over time at making sure there's an appropriate amount of stuff on your list, or that you're an appropriate level of comfortable with things on your list going undone. It is not a good way to live long term. Oh, this is something I wanted to say before in terms of prioritization. You can strain yourself. That's a thing we do all the time. You can push yourself, which means if you are not pushing yourself, if you're not straining, what you're doing is sustainable. You could do it the same every day indefinitely. If what you're doing is not sustainable, that one day is a little bit harder than the previous and then the next day is a little bit harder than the previous, which if you have a clock ticking in your head or a sense of anxiety of something bad's coming, the shoe's going to drop, it's quite likely that what that is you're noticing what you're doing is unsustainable, but you don't know how to shift it. So you're just kind of hoping whatever shift needs to happen happens before you hit the point where it crashes. But either that will happen, you'll get lucky and something will change, or you have pre-built in breaks, summer breaks coming up, I just got to make it through another blah, blah, blah. So we constrain ourselves. And sometimes you'll look at your priority list and say, no, I really do have to get all of this stuff done. I can't make, and you strain and you sleep less and you don't rest and relax and you don't eat the food that you should be eating or socialize with the people that you want to socialize with. Just know that when you are straining yourself, everything that you're pushing yourself to do is still a cost that you'll have to pay. You're just going to have to pay it after. So if you're straining, if you're pushing to do more than is sustainable, know, again, I either can exert some influence and have some choice over how my crash is going to go, when I'm going to crash and how I'll rest and recover. I can do it in a manageable way, potentially, hopefully. Or I can hope and pray and have wishful thinking that if I just do it right, then I won't crash, or that I'll make it to the point where a break comes or whatever before I crash. And that might work. Or you might crash at a very inconvenient time at which you have no control. So I'm trying to shift this thinking from if I know more, I'll be able to do everything, to if I know more, I'll be able to have more control over which of the things I'm trying to do get done and which don't. That's what we're going for, more control. There isn't a magic solution. Having said that, we could talk another time about, once you identify a task, how to build a system that makes that task less costly, which is only worth doing if it's a repeated task, right? If something takes me 15 minutes and I do it, I'm simplifying here because obviously we care more about time and frequency, but I got to go. So simplified. If I'm doing something that takes me 15 minutes to do, and I could build a system that makes it so that it only takes me 10 minutes to do, but it takes 3 hours to build the system, well, then I want to make sure that I'm going to have to do this task at least, whatever the math works out to, X number of times to make it so that it was worth building the system for that increased efficiency. And of course, automation is something that can take things from taking some resources to taking no resources after you put in the work and the resources to build that system. So yeah, you can automate things and whatever, but in that week when all those things come up, that's not the time. Building systems and developing skills take more resources than just doing the task. That's why we don't do it. If it made it simpler, easier, cheaper to do this thing I'm trying to do right now by making a plan for this thing I'm trying to do right now, then we would automatically do it. It takes time and energy to make the plan. So unless it's applicable in some kind of ongoing way that makes it worth it, we're not going to do it. But we can talk about automation and skill development and that kind of stuff, how to make these things more efficient. You just can't do that when it's happening, when it's overwhelming. That's when something's overwhelming and you get through it, then you can do a postmortem and say, what things do I want to work on improving so that the next time, because I think there will be a next time, it goes better than this. But in this moment, it's prioritization, and that you have to be aware going in. Kind of like life is meaningless if you're not aware of the fact that it ends, right? So same thing here. If you go into prioritization without accepting, I am looking at which of these things am I most comfortable with failing to do, then you're not really prioritizing. You're just trying to find a magical way of organizing it that will make it all easy enough. And lots of other things you can do to getting help. Like you mentioned, hiring people is one way of getting help. There's other ways. Lots of things you could do to bring the cost down. But when it's overwhelming, you have to go in with that idea that, and then it gives you a frame of reference, right? Like, okay, maybe I do have the time and space to focus on making some of these things cheaper by paying someone to take some off my plate. Great. But I still have to do that based on, okay, what things would I have to cut theoretically otherwise, or be worried about having to cut otherwise? And then is it worth paying this person to do that so that I can include that? So still going in that way. I really do have to go. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, those of you in chat, building that system. Remind me, just anything I say like that, remind me, and I'll talk about it. Otherwise, I will probably forget. I will see you next week, Wednesday, 1 o'clock, same time. The following week will be Tuesday, and the week after that will be Thursday, hopefully at 1 as well, but keep you updated. Thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye.